Okay, I was asked a question recently about the best way to learn Brazilian Portuguese, so I thought I'd offer a few thoughts on that. Firstly, there's no special difference between Portuguese and any other language in terms of the learning process, so you've still got to do all the hard work. But there are a couple of special points to make about Brazilian Portuguese, I think. The first of which is that it's very different from Portuguese from Portugal. So if you're not sure about the differences, it would be a good idea to get clear what they are, because there's a huge difference, not least in terms of accent, but also in terms of the way that the language is spoken. They really are quite different. So, I'd suggest getting clear about which type of Portuguese you want to learn, and then make sure that the resources that you've got match that type of Portuguese. It was going to get very confusing if you don't do that. The second thing is that, for me, Brazilian Portuguese is a fairly easy language. And I base that on a few things. The first of which is that grammatically it's very straightforward for anyone coming from an English-speaking background or any of the Romance languages. There are not a great deal of complex grammatical things to know. And I also think it's quite flexible in terms of what's acceptable in speech. You hear a lot of different things. It's quite common to hear what grammatically would be called errors or mistakes. Quite common to hear them being used that way in spoken daily Portuguese in Brazil. So it is quite flexible. And I think the reason I say that it's a fairly simple language is because Brazil is one of the few countries that I've been to where it's fairly common to find Westerners. And I'm thinking specifically of Brits or Americans who generally don't do very well at learning other languages. In Brazil, it's actually quite common to find people from that background who have learned to speak Portuguese fairly well, or have got to quite a high degree of communicative competency in the language, which, as I said, is fairly rare to find. Which really suggests to me that there are certain things about the language or the culture which make it easy to learn. And I think the culture is really, really attractive to a lot of people. And I think the relative simplicity of the language, combined with the fact that a lot of people really get into the culture big time, makes it a very approachable, learnable language. And along those lines, I would really suggest to anyone that that you start speaking right from the beginning. By either, it depends where you are. If you're in Brazil, by just getting out there and speaking as much as possible. If you're not, try to find some Brazilians locally. And if that's difficult, then the usual online language exchange type places, iTalki, conversationexchange.com, these types of places. I think whereas with some languages you really need to do a lot of groundwork before you would want to start speaking. I think because Portuguese is quite an approachable language, I think that a bit of time spent with a standard, teach yourself Brazilian Portuguese type textbook is really enough for you to then sort of dive in and start speaking as quickly as possible. There are lots of little quirks and idiosyncrasies to spoken Portuguese which you're never going to pick up from a textbook, and it's really important to start picking those things up straight away. So yeah, in summary, I'd say that Portuguese is a fantastic language to learn. It's relatively simple compared to other languages, especially if you're from a European background, and start speaking straight away. Find someone to speak with and start arranging regular sessions, and you'll find yourself speaking in no time. Oh, and go to Brazil.